I was rewatching The Sopranos recently and noticed that although there are 6 whole seasons showcasing Tony's rise from capo to boss and his eventual downfall, there are only 2 episodes that are directed by series creator David Chase. The pilot episode that aired on January 10th, 1999, and the finale, titled Made in America, that aired on June 10th, 2007. While watching these 2 episodes again, I noticed some interesting parallels. Both begin with Tony waking up. The pilot seems to take place in summertime, but the finale is winter. But there's something more, something much deeper. What if these 2 episodes are mirror images of each other? In the pilot, Tony isn't perfect, but at times he shows temperance, charity towards others, kindness, and he guides his family to understand patience and humility. Yet in the finale, Tony hardly has any redeeming qualities. He's become a greedy and wrathful glutton, and he uses envy, lust, and sloth and pride as weapons to control and manipulate others. By the end of the show, Tony has unreservedly embraced the 7 deadly sins. Chastity. In the pilot, Tony is seeing a Gumar, so chastity isn't exactly on the menu. But one of the scenes takes place at the Bada Bing, the strip club owned by Silvio Dante, Tony's concierge. Yet curiously, during this business meeting with Hesh, none of the gangsters seem to notice any of the nearly naked women surrounding them. They're all focused on how to recoup HMO guy's gambling debt. When Silvio tells the waitress, no doubt an attractive woman, that drinks for the gangsters are on the house, you only see her silhouette, and you never see her face. That's how focused these guys are on business, they hardly notice her. But what happens at the end of the show? Tony meets his lawyer in that same club to discuss impending charges. Although the lawyer is a professional, he seems more focused on the waitress's butt, which I can respect, she has a good one, and stealing peeks at the strippers on the security camera. The ketchup bottle, I can't help but wonder, is some sort of a phallic symbol for what he's mentally doing. Tony ends up getting angry. I wonder if that's because he can't get any satisfaction. Maybe the temptation has lost its appeal to him personally. But over the course of the show, Tony's many infidelities do catch up with him, notably in the episode Whitecaps. By working out of a strip club, Tony has combined temptation with business associates susceptible to lust, to the point that his own lawyer is probably thinking less about motions to dismiss and more about double D's in motion. Furthermore, AJ and Rhiannon, crossing the line from friends into something more lustful, almost get killed when AJ's SUV explodes, showing that Tony's son is well on his way to following in his father's footsteps. Temperance. Now, in the pilot, one of the first scenes involves Carmela and Meadow. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to say Fielder. Carmela tells Fielder that she needs brain food for school, a real breakfast, then offers her some Chivadel, I don't know if I'm saying that right, which Fielder strongly rejects. Later, Fielder and Hunter can be seen eating toast, a diet of literal bread and water, which was considered a holy and temperate diet in medieval times. Tony has lunch later with Chris at Artie's restaurant, but the meal isn't actually shown. When Tony meets with his mother, Livia, and she offers him eggplant, he tells her he already ate. And of course, we have AJ's famous line, no F-word ziti. But in the finale, things are very different. In the finale, Tony goes to Bobby Bacala's funeral, and afterwards they all go to eat. There's so many shots of food, a shot of Tony and Carmela here. I think this was noted by the Masters of Sopranos website from a while back. I think it's worth noting by comparison that the last line of the pilot is Carmela saying, let's eat, at AJ's birthday party, which was rain-checked after Tony collapsed on AJ's real birthday. Here in the finale, though, they're all eating at a social setting, but it's a funeral. Paulie sits down with his pants unbuttoned and mentions, boy did I eat, reminiscent of boy are you fat, Tony B line from much earlier in the series. After this large meal, Tony is seen at the safe house eating a sandwich of some kind, even though he just ate in the prior scene. And when Tony is given a light envelope, he says, well, the good news is that at least he hasn't seen a green vegetable in over a week. Tony not only looks bigger, but you can see why based upon his behavior. He's become a full-on glutton. Charity. In the first episode, Tony gives his mother a CD player, cruise tickets to Artie, though he has an ulterior motive, of course. Yet both these gifts are ultimately rejected. Interestingly, in the finale, Made in America, Tony has a gift for Janice, echoing back to the pilot and the gift he had for Livia. It's ironic because he's at the house he effectively stole from Johnny Sack, someone who was once Tony's friend. Tony even badmouths Johnny at a sit-down with Butchie later. And he demands restitution for Janice since her husband Bobby was killed. Tony is shaking down New York for money so Tony doesn't have to go into his own pocket. Earlier, when Uncle Pat comes by, Tony says that Junior can rot, and he only visits Uncle Junior later on to ask him if he remembers where he hid his stash of money. Tony claims this is for the sake of Janish, and Bobby's children, but this is after Tony already pressured New York to pay up an additional sum of money. Tony tries to appeal to Paulie's greed to run Carlo's crew after Carlo becomes a guest of the government, but it doesn't work. And with Carmela, she seems more interested in another spec house than cooking something nutritious for her family. Though nothing is preventing Tony from showing up and fixing up some gabagool. I think it's worth noting that Carmela is doing this at the exact same time that Tony is visiting Junior asking about his stash. Both husband and wife here are too busy chasing money to fix dinner for their family. Ultimately, Tony's generosity is surface level, concealing a foundation of greed, diligence. Now in the pilot, Tony complains to Melfi about Christopher regarding values. He talks about how Christopher is 21 years old and just bought himself a $60,000 Lexus. Tony scolds Christopher about forgetting to call Dick Barone. Christopher forgot to do it last night, and Tony says he's up at his office at 6 a.m. every day, but Chris says he was nauseous in the morning and didn't think he was going to work at all. When they confront McAlley over a gambling debt, Tony yells at Chris to get over here and help beat up the guy. It's pretty messed up, but Tony is trying to instill Christopher with some diligence. In the finale, Chris, the symbolic son, is long gone, but AJ, Tony's real son, remains. But what is Tony teaching AJ? At the beginning of the finale, Tony asks Carmela if AJ put out some rugs to dry, or some sort of chore. And Carmela says, more with astonishment than pride, that AJ did it without having to be reminded. After 6 seasons of lazy bumpkinness, AJ finally got his act together for once. Yet despite criticizing AJ for being lazy countless times, what do Tony and Carmela do when he tries to develop conscientious habits? When Tony sees AJ jogging not far from their home, he tells him to get in and drives him the rest of the way, instead of letting him finish jogging up the hill. Also, AJ says he wants to join the army, and his ideas about it are, shall we say, probably impractical. Yet joining the army might help the recently depressed AJ develop a discipline and structure to keep him on track for the rest of his life. Naturally, his parents talk him out of it entirely. Not only do they talk out of him serving his country, they convince him with the lure of a cushy nepotism job, working for a porn director and buying him a brand new BMW that guzzles gas. And before you know it, AJ is a slouch couch sloth yet again, laughing at George W. Bush, the very commander-in-chief he wanted to serve under not that long ago. And just for the record, it's not that I am a huge fan of George W. Bush necessarily, but I'm mentioning it to demonstrate the nature of AJ as a character and Tony's negative influence on him. Tony resents AJ's laziness, yet much like Christopher in his drug use, once he tries to improve, Tony ends up doing everything he can to prevent it. And in AJ's case, he prevents diligence and encourages sloth. Kindness. Now in the pilot episode, there is a notable conflict between Tony and Junior, but Tony makes a point with Melfi that he loves his uncle very much. A big plot point in this conflict is when Tony burns down Artie's restaurant. And the fire is a really messed up thing to do, but Tony does it in a way to try to save Artie's restaurant from being ruined because Junior wants to whack a guy in Artie's restaurant. Now Artie is devastated by this, but Tony does hug him and tells him that he's his friend and he'll always help him. And when Christopher seems kind of gloomy and downtrodden, Tony does try to show some kindness towards him. Of course, Tony does blow up at him too, but quickly calms down and tells him it's a beautiful day. And yet years later and during the finale of the show, things have changed considerably. Carmela finally sees Hunter after many years, and Carm takes almost a delight in mentioning and recounting that Hunter was a failure the last time she saw her. Yet when Hunter reveals she's turned her life around and is pursuing medicine, the dream Fielder was following earlier, Carmela abruptly and rudely ends the conversation. Carmela is too jealous to be kind to Hunter like she was in the pilot. Later on, when Fielder is discussing starting salaries for her legal profession, Carmela has a very strange mix of pride and possibly envy, possibly jealous that she never pursued law or a profession herself. Does this fuel her greed? Speculating in real estate? Possibly. And with Paulie, earlier Tony tried to tempt Paulie to take over Carlo's crew by appealing to Paulie's greed, which didn't work. Unable to succeed with greed, Tony says he'll offer it to Patsy to inflare Paulie's jealousy, effectively forcing the ever-envious Paulie to accept. Carmela embraces her own envy, and Tony encourages it in others as a means to control and manipulate. Patience. In the pilot episode, Tony scolds Christopher for not waiting for Bompensero when he wants to off the Polish guy. Actually, he's Czech, but that's a type of Polak according to Christopher. Tony also tells Carmela, after Carmela and Meadow have a bit of a falling out, that Meadow doesn't hate Carm and encourages her to be patient and wait for Fielder to come back to her. In the finale, though, things have changed quite a bit. When Uncle Pat visits Tony regarding Junior, Tony angrily says let him rot. Unlike in the pilot, where Tony clearly values family and patience, he no longer believes. He stopped believing. Someone should have told him, don't stop believing, but he has. Now, AJ and Fielder. After AJ's car explodes due to parking on leaves, Tony throws one of his countless temper tantrums. When Fielder tries to intervene on AJ's behalf, Tony lashes out at her instead of listening. Fielder reacts by leaving. Tony has embraced wrath, and it's destroying his family. Humility. Now, in the beginning of the show, when Fielder complains about her mother, Tony takes her into a church and tells her how that very church was built by Fielder's grandparents. Tony is doing this to emphasize the importance of family and Italian heritage, and you can tell from Fielder's reaction that she's humbled by the magnificence of the church. Yet years later, and during the finale, things have yet again changed considerably. In the finale, Tony has dinner with Meadow one last time. I think it's worth noting here that Tony is having dinner with Fielder alone, yet she's late at Holstein's and doesn't show up on time. Also notable is that the restaurant has high ceilings and it's dark inside, not entirely unlike the chapel in the pilot. In any case, they talk and Fielder reveals that she gave up her dreams of being a medical doctor because of how law enforcement, quote-unquote, persecuted her father. Tony's reaction here shows that he's nonplussed about the idea that his daughter gave up on her own dreams of pursuing a noble profession to defend a guy like him. Instead of being humbled by her ancestors, Tony's influence has transformed Fielder into someone who is so filled with pride that it's driving her entire life path on a one-way trip to evil. Tony's downfall. Tony's downfall over the course of the show is not just random chance. It's the consequences of the choices he makes and who he has become. One of the most obvious signs is actually the pork store itself. In the pilot episode at the beginning, the store is surrounded by people, including his longtime friends Bump and Sarah and Silvio. By the end, summertime is a memory. Most of the chairs are empty. Bump and Sarah was long gone. Sil's in a coma, a consequence of Tony's war with New York. In fact, looking back on the pilot, Junior even mentions to Livia that Tony thumbs his nose at New York. And by the finale, it's an all-out war that Tony can't win. Betrayal. One of the most important elements of Tony's downfall is betrayal. And Tony manipulates Agent Harris into betraying the FBI so he can get valuable information to kill Phil Leotardo. Yet Tony himself is betrayed by Carlo, who presumably flips and goes government witness to spare his son from a long incarceration. It's instant karma for Tony. Other signs of Tony's downfall are the parallel shots of him waking up. The finale has his sleeping position resembling that of being in a coffin. I think that was actually noted by Masters of Soprano long ago, but I thought to mention it anyway. It's summertime in the pilot, but it's winter in the finale. Tony's downfall is a very personal experience for him, tying all the way back to his original fear of losing his family. Symbolically represented by the ducks in the pool, the pilot ends with an empty swimming pool and the song The Beast in Me playing. The question being, will the beast inside Tony drive him and his family to ruin? And that's all the way back in episode 1. Tony's great fear, often spoken to Melfi, is that his children will be unable to escape from his own vices, his own evil. That they'll remain born in this corrupt life just like he was. There's also some reminders in the finale that the Sopranos are experiencing a generational curse. Junior mistakes Mika, Janice's daughter, for Janice. Junior's confusion is actually an indication that the toxic behavior will continue, generation after generation. A curse of toxic behavior that Livia passed on to Janice, that Janice is going to pass on to Micah. AJ's words to his parents when they object to him joining the army, always with the drama, is a line that Tony's father once said to Livia. Another sign that toxicity is being inherited and passed down like a psychological hot potato. Tony embracing the 7 deadly sins is what ultimately destroys his family. It turns Fielder's humility into pride. AJ's short-lived attempt at diligence is squashed and he turns back into a sloth. Carmela's attempts at kindness sink back into a sea of envy, and Tony's attempt at any semblance of decency descends into nothing. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. I'm considering doing a Sopranos rewatch and making more Sopranos content and videos. If you'd like to see more, please give it a thumbs up or a comment. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.